I'm Ben Seghers, and I'm a graduate of this university. We'll get into my career very soon. Since there are a few younger people here, I thought I'd start off by just reviewing a bit on how I got to study guppies, how I got into the guppy business. But before I do that, I just want to show this one and see if this looks familiar to any of you. A few years ago, I was in the Natural History Museum in Brussels, and as you come in the entrance there to their desk, look what's hanging above there, another blue whale. But I should say that this is only about half or a third the size of our blue whale. And the other difference, you notice, it's got its mouth closed. So these blue whales skeletons do hang in a few other museums around the world, but I think the one we have here is by far the most beautiful. So here is what I'd like to cover in the next half hour or so. Talk a little bit about, as I said, how I got into the guppy business, basic biology of the guppy. Then we'll go to Trinidad, which is generally considered to be the home of the guppy, and say a few words about why it's a useful organism for studying evolution. And then not all is well with guppy populations in Trinidad and elsewhere, and I'll mention that. And then towards the end, we'll just get quickly into what some of you may be more interested in, is guppies as pets. Okay, from a hobby to a career, so this is how it got started. My first recollection was fishing. I was born in Belgium, by the way, and we moved to Canada when I was 6. And my first memory of a fish is probably an eel in canals near Antwerp in Belgium. And my father collected them, fished, and then put them in a white bucket. And I thought these black little snake-like things swimming around was interesting. So then we moved to northern Ontario, where the fish were huge. Then, here's the milestone, age 11, a birthday present, 4 black moor goldfish in a 2-gallon bowl. So I really looked after these fish very well. And by age 12, they thought I could graduate to a tropical aquarium. So I get 2 pair of red veil-tail guppies, a 10-gallon tank, a heater, pump, filter. As you know, if you're going from a cold water fish like a goldfish to tropicals, you need all kinds of extra goodies. Then things get out of control. Age 14 to 18, hobby gets out of control. Entire basement full of fish tanks. We lived in Kerrisdale, not too far from UBC. Breeding many species, growing aquatic plants, giving excess fish to the Vancouver Aquarium, excess plants to, trading with aquarium stores and so on. But as it turned out, for my future career, it was actually useful that this happened to me. Because, okay, here's just a few slides, young Ben fishing. So I found these in my parents' photo albums. My parents are still around there and live in White Rock. So this is Kirkland Lake, Ontario. I think these are small pikes. So that's me at about age 7. That's my mother. Then we moved to BC. This is Kalkaua Lake near Hope. Now this is quite a funny slide. It wasn't funny at the time, but you see my father and I were really proudly posing with these fish. These are large-scale suckers. Now we were so unsophisticated that we thought that, it's a big fish and eat it, so we ate the suckers and thought, well, these are kind of bony. Then later, people said, well, you don't eat suckers, you don't catch suckers. So years later, when we were more sophisticated, we always look at this man here. You see, he must be thinking, why are these foreigners posing with these suckers and being really proud of their catch? So here's my good friend Bob Staniskus and I were living here in the Fraser View district, and we got our fishing rods and our bikes, and we're heading down to the Fraser River to kind of dangerously get onto the log booms and see what we could catch. Hopefully a small sturgeon or a pea-mouthed chub, or, well, salmon would be a dream, but that never happened. Another factor was this thing here, which is a 75-gallon old cast iron bathtub in our backyard, which was sunk and make it pretty with some bricks. And we had goldfish in there, which spawned. So that's the basic story is there. Got to turn this way. Okay, so here's whoa, this is huge. This is actually a fish about this size, which is a goldfish, but it's black. So I got 4 of these at age 11. Then I got guppies that looked something like this, and I also got this book, a 1955 book all about guppies, how to get started, how to breed them, what do they eat, secrets of the experts, Now I got my own secrets. You know, I've become an expert. I should write a book. Okay, then we get a little more serious. I told myself that I'd probably do chemistry because I liked chemistry in high school, and I did very well in first year chemistry at UBC. But I had a first year course with this man, Ian McTaggart-Cowan, famously for the tetrapod collection right outside the door here. And he was the prof for Zoology 105, and he made zoology much more exciting than chemistry. So I decided that, okay, I'd become a zoologist, or at least do a BSc in zoology. Then in my third year, I was looking for a summer job, and there was a notice put up on the notice board saying that a professor called Liley was looking for someone to clean fish tanks and feed guppies and so on. And I thought, well, I'm your guy, you know. So I had the interview. I asked him all kinds of questions, apparently about water chemistry, which he couldn't answer. And so he said, you're hired. So then he said, well, why don't you do your honors thesis with me? So I did that on a fish, another tropical fish called the blue gourami. And then he said, well, you did okay on the blue gourami. Why don't you come with me to Trinidad and study wild guppies? So I just want to pay a brief moment of respect to this man who influenced me a great deal in first year, Ian McTaggart-Cowan. This photo was taken when he was, I think, about 97 or 98. He passed away a couple years ago at age 99 and 10 months. So 2 months short of 100. That's when you get the letter from the Queen, you know, so he almost made it. But he was head of zoology, taught the first year course when I was here in 63, 64, then became Dean of Graduate Studies, and then in retirement moved to Victoria, where eventually he became the Chancellor for many, many years as the University of Victoria. Okay, here's Robin Liley. This is the earliest photo I had of him. This is on our trip, first trip when I was still not a graduate student. I was a summer field assistant, and we went to Trinidad, but we also made a side trip to the Amazon looking for another fish, not a guppy, but a close relative. And here he is, surrounded by about 14 kids. This is, Belem is a city at the mouth of the Amazon River. It's very, very good for live-bearing fishes that he was interested in. Liley himself did his doctorate at Oxford, and the thesis was on 4 different species of live-bearing fishes, including the guppy. Okay, 2 other people who are important, there actually was a Mr. Guppy. Here he is. He went by the name of Lechmere Guppy. He lived from 1836 to 1916. And in 1866, he caught some guppies in Trinidad, sent them to the British Museum in London, and a chap called Gunther said, well, this is new to science. We call it Giardinus guppyi. All was well for many decades, and then somebody said, wait a minute, there's another fish in a museum somewhere else in Berlin. Looks very, very similar. Sure enough, that was also a guppy. So the common name guppy still sticks with this chap, but the actual scientific name, Pasilia reticulata, Peters, Wilhelm Peters, who collected the first guppies near Caracas in Venezuela. This man here is also very important, Carl Haskins. He was the first to really study some aspects of the evolutionary biology and genetics of guppies in Trinidad. He's noted mainly as an ant biologist. He's mostly interested in social behavior of ants. But almost as a little bit of a hobby, he would go to Trinidad studying ants, but also kept his eye out on guppies. And wrote a few rather obscure papers, which Robin Liley picked up on and got us going. Okay. This is a historical shot. I want to show you the lab as it was a few years ago when I was doing my PhD here. My office was there, and the lab, I should say that I was working in the UK at the time, and I came back for one day to the department, made a kind of courtesy call to the secretary, and I said, oh, I used to work in Hut B6. And she said, you should go outside and see what's happening. I said, well, what? So I walk out the door with my camera, and this is Hut B6 in the process of being demolished. And this is the guppy lab here. So this hole in the wall right there, it was full of guppies in the office. Don Kramer and I's office, Pete, was right there, eh? So that was to make way for this building. So Hut B6 is just about 200 meters that away, if I got my directions right, yeah. Another person who's been important in my guppy career is Anne Magurran. We worked together very closely for 10 years. This is not the way she's normally dressed studying fish, but anyway, it's sort of a posed photograph. And much of our joint work she put together in a book in 2005 called Evolutionary Ecology, the Trinidadian Guppy, which is here, available in hardback and paperback in all leading bookstores and Amazon.ca. I don't get any royalties. And here is some of the team of people I worked with over the years. Here's Anne again. I'm not a geneticist or population geneticist, so on a project like this, it's handy if you can pool your resources. My expertise is mostly in ecology and behavior, particularly watching the fish in the lab and in the streams. So we got Gary Carvalho, who is now a professor in Bangor in North Wales, and this man at the time was his postdoc, Rick, who's also now a prof in London. Just a word about Rick, and that's me, by the way. Haven't changed much, just closer shaved, right? Rick is one of these unusual guys who's always got his shirt off, and a mosquito never attacks him. There's a lot of nasty biting things in the tropics, as probably most of you know that go there for vacation. But Rick never got bitten, never got a tan either. Also, some fun was taking students there on occasion. Here's a field course in 1980. Students from at that time I was working at the University of Western Ontario, and they had a wonderful program where undergraduates could sign up for field courses, 2-week or 1-week field courses. So I gave one on tropical fish behavior, and here's the team, and again, that's what I looked like back then. And then we pooled together with Don Kramer, who was a fellow right here, there I am, Don Kramer, who was a fellow PhD student with Robin Liley at UBC. At that time, he was a prof at McGill. So when he heard that I was bringing Ontario students down there, he said, well, maybe we could do something for McGill. So this is a mixture of McGill and Western and Queens and Carleton and a whole bunch of people. And over here, where is he? There he is. See this man? He's right there in the orange jacket. Peter Belem, who also studied guppy behavior, particularly courtship and aggression, with Robin Liley at the same time. So it was great for the three of us Liley students to meet up in this opportunity on this field course. Okay, it's time to get to Trinidad. So I think the blurb said something about a virtual voyage. So of course, if we're going to do this as a voyage, we would leave Vancouver and come down Washington, Oregon, California, Mexico, Costa Rica, sneak through the Panama Canal here, and then Curacao, Aruba, now it's Venezuela. Anyway, we end up there, right on the tip, northeast tip. Of course, we don't go that way anymore. You take a jump on a plane, go to Toronto, and you're there pretty quick. Now, the first sort of Europeans that visited Trinidad, so this guy, Christopher Columbus, on his third voyage, he was sailing for the Queen of Spain. About 7 ships, I think. 3 of them went south and entered they of course thought they were going an open ocean all the way to China or to Cathay, and they must have been really surprised when suddenly, what's all this land doing in the middle of this supposedly open ocean? So here he is going in the straits between South America and Trinidad. He had a miserable trip from what I've read. The boat was leaking, all the food went putrid, and he had gout. He was ill himself. So he actually did not set foot on Trinidad, but he did name it Trinity because there were 3 hills in the southern part of the country, so he named that for the Trinity, and that's how it got its name. So now you know the name Trinidad, you know Guppy, so you're there. So 500 years after Columbus, this guy washes up on the beach. High-tech research field behavior, rubber boots, some buckets, dip net, bathing suit, suntan lotion, bug repellent, and a seine net. Beautiful, beautiful place. I should say, and Pete knows this as well, that the impression sometimes people have if you do work on a tropical species that you're spending all your time, well, not all your time, 90% of your time goofing around on the beach. Because you're in a place where tourists spend, a lot of money to get there. But it's not true. you have such a long list of things to do, populations to collect, experiments to run, that actually very few days swimming or snorkeling or anything in the sea. It was all, in the bush catching the fish. Okay, here's a pretty good map I found recently of the Trinidad, and sits here in the Orinoco Delta. This is a huge river. Give you some impression, it's about 10 times the flow of the Fraser. So imagine the Fraser times 10. And this delta, I measured this again on the map. Would be like driving from here to Portland, Oregon, from there to there. So this is massive. And of course, in the rainy season, which is sort of our summertime, huge amounts of water bathe Trinidad. So particularly this part becomes sort of semi-fresh water, which is really important for the fishes that manage to get there. So that Columbus painting, he was right in there just heading through this channel. Here's just an interesting one I came across the other day. This is looking from Trinidad, the closest point. In fact, you could probably almost see Venezuela there. On a clear day, you can see the mangroves of Venezuela from Trinidad. Some naturalists were there, and they noticed this little floating island coming in of water hyacinths. They waded out and dragged it in and started looking around, because in the past people had found animals, and guess what comes out? A snake slides out and starts swimming in the sea, which came from Venezuela, not normally found in Trinidad. Another interesting fact is that Trinidad was a part of South America. If you go back here to what it says early Pleistocene, which is around 1.8 million years ago, the outline of South America is like this. So way includes Tobago. Trinidad is actually two islands, Trinidad and little Tobago. So that's the actual outline at that time. And in fact, it may have been connected here or here as recently as 1,000 years ago. So it hasn't always been an island. And most of the work that the Guppy people do, it's in a very small area. Here again is South America, a mountainous region, mountains called the Northern Range in Trinidad and Tobago. So these are all kind of part of a mountain chain. But almost all the Guppy work that I'll be talking about later by myself and many, many other people now has pretty well been in this area. So you can see the mountains go to about, I think the highest peak is just under 1,000 meters. So a little bit like Grouse Mountain. It's as high as it gets. Very beautiful coat of arms, if you're into biodiversity. The spotted ibis, which is very famous in Trinidad. A little pheasant-like bird called cocrico, which is common to Tobago. We have here the three Columbus boats. We have some hummingbirds. And the motto, together we aspire, together we achieve. So Trinidad is great for guppies, but it's also a hot spot for biodiversity. When you think about it, it's about 1/6 the size of Vancouver Island. So it's not a huge place. But just look what's there. 467 birds, including 17 hummingbirds. 100 mammals, including 67 of these guys. I should wave my animals if I go out. Bats. Reptiles, 90 species. Amphibians, as a frog. 30 of those, 650 butterfly species, 50 freshwater fish. Of course, this is what turns me on, is this. Couldn't care less about the others. 950 marine fish, over 1,600 fungi, 3,300 plants. And an interesting fact here is, those of you, and probably most of you here are interested in natural history, obviously, and the name Sir David Attenborough will be very familiar to you, having headed up the natural history unit of BBC since early 1950s. And in the 1990s, he had a series called The Trials of Life, which featured animal behavior. And they had a massive budget. I think they've had huge cutbacks. So one of my ex-students in the UK actually is a producer with the BBC, and she almost lost her job 6 months ago for a nature program for children. So, but back at this time, they were still money, and they had a budget, cameramen, they could go anywhere in the world. And the country most visited, so they were in Canada for wolves, polar bears, they went in Antarctica for penguins, places for killer whales and so on. But The most visited country was Trinidad. Part of that has to do with it was a former British colony, easy access from London by plane and so on. So there's a lot of sort of pragmatic reasons why it might be easier to work there. So here's the view from the northern range near the summit looking to the beautiful Caribbean. If it was a clear day, you might be able to see Tobago over here. Google Earth gives you this view. This is one of my favorite places, Paria Bay. About a kilometer long, bit of a hike to get there, but about 1 kilometer of unspoiled beach. Nobody lives here. Often you're the only person. Not actually a very safe place to go because you might get mugged. But anyway, an uninhabited kilometer of just paradise. And here, a river that's been studied extensively by Guppy people, the Paria River, comes in here. There's a lagoon. Now, the guppies are not very common if there's any salt water, and this is a bit brackish. So there's another species that lives here. But from about here on up, it's beautiful guppy territory. This is a trail to get there, but it's a couple hours hike to get to Paria Bay. Okay, a few shots of how we do the work. Here's a team, Charlie Paxton, a PhD student at Oxford. Here's our postdoc, Rick, volunteer, Kathy, and we're using just nets you get in an aquarium store. Then, to catch the larger fish, we go to longer seines, and this is what it looks like. Here's a technician. We work closely with the University of the West Indies campus in Trinidad. This is Raj. He's a technician there and knows all the flora and fauna. And here I am helping Raj, and we're making a catch of fish. One funny thing when I looked at this slide the other day when I found it was when we entered the water, you can see where we did our run here with the net. Raj says to me, have a look, just have a look to the left over in this direction. And I said, yeah, what? There's like, he said, can you see those two little bumps? He said, alligator. The Trinidad has caiman, but the Trinidadians call it alligator. So he said, no problem, it's only about this big, and yeah, they bite, but it's not going to come and hurt us. So it's just fish, you know. I don't have to jump out of the water. But there they were, just looking at us while we were checking out the fish situation. Here's Rick. This is extreme seining. You don't have to do this. You're not going to catch much when you're up to your armpits. But anyway, it's a great shot of Rick's head. And after that, he needs to wash off because that river was very polluted. Here I am. This is another way to study the fish, is don't collect them, but get a mask and snorkel, and it's like being in a huge aquarium at the Vancouver Public Aquarium in the Tropical Gallery, and you can see quite a bit. Fish hiding. Sometimes they're hard to catch with the nets, but they're actually in the stream, lurking under rocks or in the riffles or whatever. So here's just a summary of some of the things that are cool about them. They give birth to live young, so if there's one big word that you should take away, Pete knows this word, so we don't have to, he's already got it. It's ovoviviparous, which means that the eggs hatch inside the mother. So this is not an egg-laying fish. And there's a couple hundred species that breed this way. Each male has a different color pattern, which we call polymorphism. They're geographically variable, which means that different streams have different colors, which we'd like to explain, and many other characters as well. If you've ever kept them at home, you'll know this is true. They court almost constantly. And Magurran and I spent time doing what we call time budgets in the field. And she was studying the females and I was studying the males, just a few meters apart. And we recorded the males spend, on a time budget, 50% of their life courting. So they're either feeding, swimming around, or courting in the wild. So it's not just your pet shop guppies that are sort of hyper-sexed, you know. They're easy to keep and breed in the aquarium, which is useful for scientists. There is short generation time. My record is 58 days, so that is from when the baby was born to when she had a baby of her own. 58 days. Now that, mind you, is perfect temperature, 6 small meals a day, you know, everything is optimal. Other people that study guppies use a figure like 3 to 4 to 6 month generation time. So they're a good model system with all these characteristics. Obviously, there's so much biodiversity on Earth, you can't study everything in detail. So you tend to pick organisms that have certain characteristics that are really useful. For example, fruit flies with a very short life cycle, huge chromosomes, and are the model system for a lot of genetics. But guppies have become useful for studying other things. So here they are, the male and the female, and I'll just quickly show with these models the courtship behavior. So it look like the female, and here we have the male. So the female has a normal anal fin down here, just like some of the other fishes I've got on display here. The male, though, it's modified, and I've got this as a sort of a green tube. It's called a gonopodium. So, almost embarrassed to do this in front of Pete Ballin, because he did his master's on this. So the male does a lot of displaying in front of the female. Arches his body, and the female is usually not interested, chasing her away. Or he may come and do a sneaky mating where she's moving, and he won't display, he'll just and she again swims away. A few days of the month, though, the female is receptive, and now this male can't believe what's happening. He displays, quivering in front of her, and she goes like head up, arch towards him, and let's get this right. They court, and often if he's successful in getting some sperm in her body, you see he's saying like I did it, sort of thing, over. This can happen many times per day. Different males can mate with the same female. So now she's fertilized, let's say, and depending on the temperature of the river or your aquarium, in about a month she'll have her babies. And she can store sperm. So I've had some fish up to 5 broods. So you can imagine, I'll just illustrate that. So where are we now? March. Okay, so now we'll move to, so she's fertilized today, right now, just right here. And we'll go for 1 month ahead, and about 15 babies drop out. Okay, we're in April, we go to May. She's still alone, no male has come near her. Another 15, another one, until we're in August or something, and she's still having babies. By that time, though, she's a bit running out of gas. There may only be 4 or 5. So she may have 20 in April, but only 2 or 3. Now, every time she has babies, she's receptive for a few days. So another male can come and mate. So now we have a bit of a problem. She's already got some stored sperm from male 1, and now male 2 is on the scene. People have done experiments that show that the second male has a greater proportion of the offspring. And then, of course, she could go for another 5 months. So a female actually does not have to be mated by very many males to sort of do her whole 2 or 3 or 4 years of reproductive life. So that's the courtship. And after that, here's the baby situation. This is from a book I have up here called Guppies, Fancy Strains and How to Produce Them. Wonderful Japanese man. And you can see the female here and the baby is popping out. This is kind of hard to photograph. I've never been able to do it. It's hard to predict when the babies are going to be born. Sometimes it's even like, in the middle of the night. So, and another problem is that they tend to be cannibalistic. So often, as those of you who've kept them, you probably have some kind of breeding trap or heavy vegetation. Much of the work on the courtship behavior, color, mate choice, and everything was summarized by another Anne. Anne is a good name for guppy workers. This is Anne Hood from the Chicago area. Studied that. Just a few more habitat shots here. This is a very famous place called Haskins Falls. And there's Charlie, I think Charlie, a graduate student at Oxford, is there. This is quite famous because it's a barrier to predators, so most predators. So the big predators can only, where's my button here? Can only get here. They can't get up there, but there is one other predator up there. I'll show you in a moment. So this is a barrier. And the genetics of the population here and the color and the behavior is very, very different than there. So this is really quite an exciting thing. It's what evolutionary biologists refer to as a natural experiment. It's what we dream of, that certain environmental conditions are dramatically different over a short period of time. So you can test out, your theories. And guppies, as I mentioned before, they have color polymorphism within a population. So you see they're all a bit different. This is a Paria River population, characterized by a lot of orange and yellows. Another river called the Upper Aripo, it's not much orange, but a lot of black spots, silver. Again, differences, some of these genes are pretty well known, but there's a lot of color polymorphism. Okay, here's what eats guppies. Wow, this is the largest. This is only a 10-centimeter fish. I've never seen it the size of a blue whale before. This is an amazing screen you have here in the BD. Rivulus hardii. Again, kept a little bit in the hobby. I've heard that there are a few people have them in Vancouver, but I haven't seen them for a long time. This fish eats mostly ants, even jumping out of the stream to capture them from overhanging vegetation in small streams. But it also catches young guppies, small. The one that goes for the big one is this guy, the pike cichlid. This one was here in Hut B6, which I showed you being demolished there in the previous slide. One of my pet pike cichlids. And at nighttime, this creature, Hopleus malabaricus, comes out in the stream. It can get to really a large size. Show you here is another technician from the zoology department in Trinidad. And we've gone out at night with a headlamp, and he's got a spear, a homemade spear, and he speared this there's a tail down to here, I think. The fish was quite aggressive and actually bitten into some roots there as well. Well, I won't dwell on this, but just to show you that to even do the one little part of this story, which is the diets of these predators, it's a lot of painstaking work. You have to dissect a lot of fish, and you see Rivulus hardii there, 259, and then you come up with the diet, sort of pie diagram of which ones are eating insects, which ones are eating fish, which ones are eating guppies. So you can see the Hopleus there, 100% eating fish, pike cichlid, guppies, and other fish. Other species that are in these streams are not as important guppy predators. So this is not only my work, Pete's work, but a lot of people around the world. This is all in one slide, basically. Guppies from high predation sites where you have these big predators. It's a dangerous place to live. There's all kinds of things constantly attacking you. They have larger broods of smaller babies. They're smaller adult body size. The males are less colorful, less courtship display, more of that sneaky mating. They're less aggressive, not as much fighting. We test aggression in the field by just getting a little pebble, coating it with some gelatin, warm gelatin, put on some tropical fish food, and put it in the stream for a while. And usually females will quickly discover this and start pecking at the pebble covered in the food. And in some streams, other females will come, or even males, and they start defending this, and they start fighting, defending the pebble. Other places that never happens, they all feed, side by side as though, everybody's entitled to the snack. Okay, so they also better escape behavior. So again, to illustrate this, imagine this boy here is a guppy, and I'm coming at you as a predator. Okay. If you're from a high predation thing, you're going to take off at a great distance. If you're from low predation, probably let me get about this close. I touch your knee. See, didn't respond. You're from a low predation population. Okay, let's move on here. I missed the most important thing here. These population differences are heritable. So this means that it's transmitted to the next generation. When we did this work, we started doing this work, Pete and I, back in the 60s, people found this quite hard to believe. They thought, just different environment, you learn it, different food, different temperature. This is not going to be transmitted to the offspring or to the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren. But lo and behold, we had fish here at UBC 5, 6, 7, 8 generations removed from the wild, raised under constant conditions, and they still behave, very different like they would in the wild. This man recently has made a lot of waves in the guppy scene. He's David Resnick. He gave a few seminars at UBC and SFU in recent years. In the special issue of National Geographic to celebrate the publication of Darwin's book, Origin of Species, they had a special section called What Darwin Didn't Know. And there is David. I think my thing is on the fritz here. Oh no. Here he is. I spoke to him about this. I got this magazine. I was looking at it actually in a drugstore, and I said, holy smokes, there's David Resnick in National Geographic. So he said that the photographer from National Geographic came down to Trinidad, and he said he spent 4 days with me, lots of photographs. And he says, and guess what he puts in the thing? He gets me just looking down into a net, not even a good shot of his face. It's quite funny. But I forgot to mention that if you ask children in Trinidad, are there any guppies in the stream? They may say, well, what's a guppy? Even though it's the home of the guppy. They know them as millions. So here I'm a little bit of play on millions. Millions of dollars in millions the fish. Now this chap, Resnick, University of California, just listen to this, heads up a team of researchers working on $5 million, 5-year grant, examining the impact of predation. And he's put together, because he can't spend $5 million by himself, he's got to spread it around North America. We got 2 Canadians involved here with the asterisk, Paul Benson at Dalhousie in Halifax, and where's Andrew Hendry at McGill. But they're all over the place. Doug Fraser's a friend of mine, Siena College, and a few of these other people I've met as well. So this is, the 5 years, by the way, I think it's just ended. And I think the plan was that there'd be some kind of book coming out on this, so you'll probably see another guppy book in recent years. Guppies in strange places. Okay, I got to move along here. We used to have guppies in Banff around 1950. There's a hot spring there, as probably you know, the Cave and Basin. And they were there for a while. Some hobbyists put them in there, and then they went extinct. But even to this day, there still are, what's there now? There's still the jewel cichlid, Hemichromis from Africa. And there's some sailfin mollies are there. I've had a chap I know who's a psychologist, believe it or not, there's such a thing as a guppy psychologist. He works at Moscow State University, and he gets his from a sewage lagoon, steaming sewage lagoon. Even when there's snow and ice, it's still hot enough, and it's just teeming with guppies. I've had people send me preserved ones from a lake in Bali, from a crater lake in Uganda. Some of these were interesting. I've seen it collected myself from the next island north of Trinidad, a crater lake. And we know very little about what happens when guppies end up in other waters. Here is the crater lake Grande Tang in Grenada, which also has red swordtails. Pete, red swordtails, another very common tropical fish, which you wouldn't expect to find in a natural habitat. And it's got tilapia, which are found throughout the tropics. Again, introduced. This is an extinct crater lake, extinct crater, and so we wouldn't have had fish originally, but they were put in there. Now, recently, a thesis from Anne's group in St. Andrews, Scotland, Anne Magurran's group, half of this woman's thesis, Amy Deacon, did a survey with email and literature surveys and so on, Google searches, to see where guppies found. And she came up with this very colorful map. It's a little bit weird, but anyway, yellow is no guppies. So Antarctica, no guppies. Now this is also a bit strange. You see like this color here stands for established in geothermal heated waters. Of course, it could just be a couple of places, but she's colored the whole continent there and Siberia and so on. Anyway, there are guppies somewhere here and here. Outdoors. We're not talking now about pet shop guppies. But the interesting ones are red here, where they're established and they seem to, so you see the natural range, I should have mentioned this, is green. If you're red-green colorblind male, you've got a problem, because this probably won't be very obvious, but there's the natural range, there's Trinidad. So you can see they've ended up in mostly around the equator, Australia, Indonesia, So they're now found in, well, just the next slide will explain this, found in 73 countries. So originally they came from about 4 or 5 countries in Northeast South America, and now they're, and Deacon tried to find out through her questionnaire, why are these guppies in your country? And, well, the yellow is unknown. They're here, but we don't know why they're there. Some are mosquito control. About 1940, the World Health Organization experimented with introducing guppies in the tropics for mosquitoes related to malaria. Some were just released from fish tanks, and then some for both. So that's what her survey for these 73 countries showed. This is kind of interesting. How did guppies get to other Caribbean islands? If you read the literature, often they say that Grenada, Martinique, Puerto Rico, Dominica, you know, all those places, that they're part of the native range. I've been to quite a few of these places, and it's very suspicious the way they're distributed in the habitats they live in, that they were actually introduced. So I had a discussion about this with Jake Kenny, who is head of zoology down there, who's got this new book called Views from the Ridge, Natural History of Trinidad. And he came up with the suggestion that in the days of the sailing ships, they moved between these islands in the Caribbean, trading, and they had barrels, big barrels of water in the back of the boats, and they would get infested with mosquito larvae. So they put a few guppies, or similar fish, in there to eat the mosquito larvae. So of course these things get to the other islands. So just, you know, pure speculation, but it may explain some of the unusual distributions of guppies in some of the other Caribbean islands. Well, they are important fish, and I was getting a bit worried that the populations were under some stress. So I wrote this article a number of years ago called The Rivers of Northern Trinidad, Conservation of Fish Communities for Research. Just to highlight that this is a really important natural experiment and a resource that we should get my advance here. So it's not too surprising what the threats are. In most cases, we have water pollution, deforestation, slash and burn, dams, introduced exotics, of course, overfishing, small island, very easy access to these streams. But this is the one that has bothered me quite a bit. Scientists' own sampling and field experiments. It's very, very tempting to go and say, okay, I need an experiment, I need 400 males. Let's just collect 400 males, bring them back to Vancouver, Oxford, or anywhere. It's also tempting if you've got a stream with a waterfall and there's no guppies above that waterfall, but it's low predation. It's very tempting to say, okay, I'll get some guppies from high predation, carry them a couple of bucket loads above, and see how they do. Do they get larger, brighter, behavior changes? And experiments like that have been done, particularly by David Resnick and John Endler. And Anne and myself and others have cashed in on using those experiments. So, you know, I benefited a great deal. But we can't just have people, you know, putting them all over the place, or it'll all just get too mixed up. And I would note that guppies are, in general, tough and are likely to go extinct, but it's this genetic diversity that's threatened, and that's what we have to try to desperately hang on to. Okay, here's an introduced fish. This was a surprise to me. I collected this one, and when I brought it back to the department in Trinidad, everybody started shaking their heads and saying, no, 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 this is suspicious. This is not, you have not found a new species here. And with a lot of effort, we found out that the actual government secretly got them from Guyana and put them in one river in Trinidad with the hope of, you know, they would breed and then it'd be something else for the tropical fish hobby. Of course, not a very good idea to do this. So you bring in diseases, and there's a native corridors there, which is already an important export fish, so you don't want to mess up with that. So it was a real coincidence that a few days after the government people put them in a really remote place, myself and a graduate student arrived on the scene and thought, wow, we've found a new species. Unfortunately, it was not a new species. I think I'll just skip that one and move on. I've got this book here. This will tell you how to do it, a little bit about the genetics, a very basic book, but for a hobbyist, not too bad. You can start off with a fairly plain looking fishes and create these ones. Advance. Here's what's currently available in Thailand. Thailand and Singapore, there's a lot of breeding and export of guppies there. I was in a pet shop, or aquarium shop the other day, and the lady there, this is Aquariums West on Beatty Street, and she said most of her guppies now come from Singapore and Florida. At the moment, they're having some trouble with the Singapore ones, apparently, because lots of disease coming in from those. But these are some of the prime specimens that win awards at guppy shows. And this is, I found this quite interesting. The Malaysian Fancy Guppy Club, some of their star hobbyists were going to exhibit at a competition in Boston. And here are the bags of their fancy guppies being ready to fly to Boston. So it's quite a thing. Okay, I'll just go through these quickly. This is in Richmond. You can buy fancy guppies, all these ones. Males, $2.79 each. This is interesting. There's a social network called Guppies.com. This is incredible. 26,900 members. They even celebrate people's birthdays, apparently. There are currently 111 users online. The record was 781, so you know, if you thought that guppies are small business, you just look at this and say 26,000 members of this Guppies.com. Okay, we're nearing the end here. This is quite hilarious. This is Guppy.ca. There's a lot of people that have the name Guppy, and they kind of are a little bit sensitive to the fact that the only thing that people think about is the fish. So they've set up their own website to say, we want the world to know. We got writers, naturalists, artists, chefs, athletes, scientists, scholars, everything under the sun. So yes, it's true that Lechmere Guppy made us famous, but you know, there's more to it than just the fish. That's the point. And here is our own Guppy, our UBC Guppy, Neil Guppy. Anybody know this man? I've never met him, but I was in the same race, and when I was looking at pictures online, actually you can't quite see it, but his name is actually there, Neil Guppy. I said, oh, that's what Neil Guppy looks like. He's running, this is almost taken, this photograph, it's right outside the Beatty. It's a 10K run around UBC. Anyway, I think he's head of the sociology department. So he's no doubt a member of Guppy.ca, the non-fish Guppy. Well, I'll just flash through these quickly. This just shows you how you can make a mistake. It's called the Reverend Guppy. He was never a reverend. This book, they've even got this guppy with a collar, because the photograph of the old photograph, there's very few of Lechmere Guppy, has what looks like a white collar, but he was actually agnostic. He was not a man of the cloth. This is a book on famous people like Leotard, sax of the saxophone, Jacuzzi, people whose names have been attached to various things. For kids, here's one for you. The guppy that was afraid to swim. No. Guppies in tuxedos. And the ultimate, if you're in Southern California, you need this book, The Beer Guppy's Guide. You see this guppy is happy inside this real ale. So this apparently for Los Angeles, Fresno, San Diego, etc., will tell you where the breweries are, the clubs, festivals, everything to do with beer. And they use a guppy as their... Okay, that's just about it. So this is for my Chinese friends. Feng Shui. I was once given this, by the way, it's a Trinidadian flag. I was once given this cup. It says success, and it's got guppies on it. And on the back side, it says this. Keep a fish for career success. Fish always bring good feng shui. Look, a tank of guppies in the north corner of your living room will bring new developments in your career. So I think you should all go out and, if you want to be successful, put them in the north corner. It's true, right? Okay, I think that's all. By the way, if you want to stick around later, I've got some fancy guppies from Aquariums West here, 2 males and 2 females live in this jar here, and a few other books related to. Okay, thank you very much.